I was totally going to record this next episode Stephen Hawking style again. My throat's still sore, still don't know what's wrong with my vocal cords, and I no longer can eat my frozen berries with cream. But I think I'm okay. I'm gonna give it a try. Hi there, and welcome to episode 13 of Yarns and Yarns. My name is Shay McIntosh Ford, and I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with my husband, my two boys, and our spoiled puppy. This is a show about yarns as in fibers and yarns as in stories. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back. Thank you for joining me again. If you are a new viewer, welcome aboard. I hope that my show entertains you. I don't know how entertaining that I am, but maybe you like the things that I make. I primarily do yarns as in fibers. I do knitting, crochet. I'm starting to get into spinning. Got a little laundry rolling around in the dryer, so sorry if you can hear all the knocking. So you can find the links to all the yarns, patterns, books, podcasts, social media, all of that kind of stuff down below in the description box. I actually started a new playlist. If you are a subscriber, you will know this. One of the reasons it's been so long since I've recorded for Yarns and Yarns is, oh, there's a bug outside my window. A big one. But one of the reasons it took me so long to do a recording is I finally have a diagnosis. I traveled to Denver because, I had lingering symptoms from my bout with COVID 14 months ago. They never went away. It got worse and worse and worse. It was mostly digestive. Of course, there's the vocal cord issue, which I don't know what that is, but it's not reflux. I went through all kinds of tests in Denver. I was diagnosed, and if you're interested in any of that, that's all in the other channel. But I've been diagnosed with a form of microscopic colitis called lymphocytic colitis. It's under the irritable bowel disease branch of autoimmune conditions. So this is a chronic illness, and I will be dealing with this for the rest of my life. And I didn't want to ramble on and on and on about it during my knitting podcast. So if you're interested in that journey, it will be in my other playlist, and I'll link to that below. I've only got one episode so far. I'll be, exploring the ins and outs of the disease and the frustrations, because there are a lot of frustrations. Anyway, enough about that. So now for all of the yarny goodness. My first FO is a sock head cowl to match my sock head hat. This is a little flipped up. Yeah, this is the Cat Lady Yarns in the October Graffiti colorway in her perfect sock base, so 80% superwash merino and 20% nylon. The last time you saw it, I was here, and I want to say it was in this direction that I was knitting, and so I think I've done the rest of this since from here up from the last time you saw it, because that's the direction I've got the stitch marker in. But it could have been this way. I don't know, but I guess it doesn't really matter. I didn't actually follow the pattern exactly. It calls for, after the first, you know what? It is this way. I just realized that because my bind off, I use the super stretchy bind off, and it's a little curly. So I'm gonna have to find a new bind off the next time I make one of these. The pattern calls for the cowl to be this from the ribbing to here, 12 inches. I didn't think it really needed to be that long. Also, the ribbing on both ends is only 3 inches instead of 4. Not quite as big as the pattern calls for, which is fine. This is a free pattern by Kelly McClure, and so is the sockhead cowl. So both of these are free, but I'm glad that I have a matching set. The other reason I didn't do the full amount of knitting on this is because I wanted to have a little bit of yarn left over to make some matching fingerless gloves. This is how much I have left in my cake, so hopefully that's enough for 2 fingerless gloves. It is 68 grams. The gloves that I made, the Knock Knock convertible mitts, call for 100 grams, but there's a lot on the wrist, so maybe if I just shorten it a little bit. And I don't actually even need the convertible part, because if I shorten them and put the convertible part on, they're going to look a little strange, because cold weather you'd want a little bit longer glove. I think it's just going to be straight up, fingerless mitts that just go around my hand. That'll work. It'll be a nice matching set. I just really love the way the micro striping happened with this yarn. It looks so nice. And I used the Chalgoo's red lace, US size 2, 2.75 millimeters needles, which I have on a whip, so you'll see those later. I said I was going to work on this for mindless knitting when I went to Denver, but I ended up finishing it before I left. So my next FO are my crocheted dragon scale gloves, which became a lot more involved than I expected. If you remember from my last episode, the skein of yarn that I bought had other colors in it that I didn't expect. And so there was a lot of snipping and magic knot tying involved in making these. And I didn't have enough yarn by the time I got done doing all of that. So I had to buy another ball of yarn. You can see if the original balls of yarn had looked like this one, I would have known not to buy this one. They looked like the colors I wanted, so I ended up buying them. I still like the way they came out. Obviously, I need to weave in my ends, but they still came out really nice. I didn't want the striped effect, the striped look, because this would have striped up. I needed to hold the yarn double. I made sure that I pulled from opposite ends of the cake. It would create this more marled effect instead of stripes. They did come out really nice though. And the yarn that I used is the Lion Brand Mani Petty, and it is in the mittens colorway. Losing my voice already. Next time I want specific colors, I'll make sure that the skein of yarn has exactly the colors I want instead of having to cut and tie, because that was a lot of work. All of the colors that I had cut out were all purples and blues. I wanted warm colors and no cool colors. You can see a little bit showed up, and that was fine. I didn't mind that. But it had a lot more purple and blue than I was expecting. I forgot the makeup of the yarn is the 75% superwash wool and 25% polyamide. I don't know what polyamide is. Is it nylon? I don't know. This is a paid for pattern by Rachel Barlow, and I'll link that below. And I made the small medium size, and it fits pretty well on my hand, but this is a gift, so it doesn't matter if it's me. I used an E-hook, so 3.5 millimeter hook for that one. My next FO I also finished before going to Denver, but it is related. It's the one that I ended up doing a lot of mindless knitting on. I totally learned the brioche stitch. I'm so proud of myself for this one. It was a challenge. It was a lot of YouTube tutorials, which I will link below. Stephen West actually had a really great tutorial on brioche, but I needed also to learn to do it in the round. So Andrea Mallory was a good one for that. But the one I ultimately ended up following was called Hasarga Knit. I think I'm pronouncing that right. This is the hat that I had intended to make when my mom sent me this yarn. So I don't have any details on the yarn because I don't have any yarn bands that went with this. She had started a brioche project in the round using the pink and the brown. I just decided to use it because I think they go really nicely together. You can wear it either in the pink style, or you can wear it with the brown style. It's totally reversible. I love that. I like the pink. And look at those decreases. The way it comes out on the top, it just looks really cool. I love that. And there is one little mistake that I made when I was first decreasing, because it took me, I want to say 5 or 6 tries. I kept having to put it in a lifeline because I was frogging. Frogging was my jam with learning how to do this thing. Even so, I still have one little mistake right there in this first decrease row. I think I must have purled when I should have knitted. I left it in. I wasn't that concerned with it. So there's no ball bands with this yarn. I'm pretty sure this is straight wool. It's a pretty warm hat. There is no pattern either. I sort of took a whole bunch of different tutorials. I used these needles. These are the needles that my mom had sent me. Her brioche project was on these needles, and since I didn't know how to do brioche, a lot of the stitches had fallen off and I had no idea how to put them back on. And I ended up learning how to do that when I made this hat. But I have no idea what size these needles are. I think they're a 5. When I measured it, it looked like a 5, but they're very worn. There's no label at all on them. And even like here, some of the paint is worn off, so I don't know if there was a label there at one point or not. I think I have enough left of the yarn of both colors to go ahead and make myself a cowl. So all that brings me to the whips, and while everyone on Instagram and social media, they're all making these cute little summer tops and light things to wear, I am knitting a sweater. So I'm going against the flow that way. This is hubby's sweater, and it is in brioche. I did not know that it was brioche when I got started. When he picked it out, it said English rib. It didn't say brioche, and I didn't know that was the same thing. The pattern also is a single color, so English rib in one color. I like the 2 color. And also I couldn't find all of one color in the right size yarn. That's why it's blue and black. Free pattern, which I'll link below. As you can see, I just split for the sleeves, so I haven't gotten very far from there. There are a few little mistakes, so like right here where I purled instead of knitted, and I think there's another one right here. So just little ones that I'm not too chuffed about. You know, I think they're fine. I'll be able to wear it blue side out or black side out. So that's what the black side looks like. Either way, I think it looks great. The reason for this one, so all winter long, he has been wearing this awful sweater. I mean, it's a nice sweater. It's got, you know, pretty cables on it and stuff. But I guess one of his sisters gave it to him like 20 years ago. So now it's got holes in it and ladders, and he's not very careful about it. I think it's acrylic anyway. He throws it in the regular laundry, and so the last time he threw it in the laundry, he did this, and I'm like, no, you need a new sweater. So this, and this is also the reason I'm making this now instead of in the fall. Our 18th anniversary was March 22nd, and so for our anniversary presents to each other, he bought me knitting supplies, and I am knitting him a handmade sweater. So that's the whole point of that. The yarn I'm using, I would have liked to have used a wool yarn, would have been warmer, but the nice thing about Brioche is that the stitch has lots of air pockets to it. It actually is a very warm stitch anyway, but because he has a tendency, like I said, to just toss things in the regular wash, I decided to go with acrylic because it's very forgiving, and if it ends up in the dryer, it's not going to shrink. So I ended up using from Joann's their Big Twist Renewal yarn. And the nice thing about it is that it's actually 100% recycled acrylic, so it makes me feel a little bit better about buying this one. And it's just the simple colorway. It's dark blue, and the other one is obviously just black. It's not quite as warm as a wool, but we live in Oklahoma now and not Colorado, so that's not that big a deal. The other thing about the construction of this sweater, and I don't know if you can see it anymore. You can kind of see it a little bit. I was using, you can see the little indentation here. I was using lifelines because in the very beginning, I got through the collar and I really struggled. I had never done a raglan sweater either, so learning raglan, understanding the concept behind raglan was a new one for me. And I kept doing it wrong, and so again, there was a lot of frogging going on, so I definitely used a lifeline. And I kept putting the lifeline in a little farther down, but I never needed it after a while. I got so good at just doing the simple brioche stitch that it wasn't really necessary, and I find the indentation a little annoying, so it'll probably stretch out, after a while. But I haven't been using a lifeline at all. The other thing that I did wrong with this sweater, I realized after I'd already done the collar, I didn't look at the directions closely enough, and apparently you needed to knit the whole first row or first round, and I didn't see that in the directions until it was too late. So the collar's a little on the curly side, but I don't think he cares. So this is my summer knit. So one of the nicest things I found about knitting with brioche is that after you do it for a while, it's almost as mindless as stockinette stitch. This was great in Denver because I had a lot of waiting while I was, waiting for different doctor's appointments. So this was really nice to knit on. It was still pretty small at the time, and it's easy to stop and pick up again. This is a free pattern, and it's by Drops Design, and it's called Lagoon. And so I told hubby that I would be knitting him a sweater, and so I pulled up a bunch of sweaters that I thought that I could knit or that I would like to have tried knitting. I definitely wanted something top down in the round where there's not a lot of sewing, the way my Weasley sweater was sewn together. And so this was one of the sweaters that came up, one of the pattern pictures that came up, and he picked it because it looked easy. He saw just knit stitches. He had no idea it was brioche, which is fine. I've been wanting to learn it, so he gave me no more excuses. I learned brioche, and I love it. I am using the Chalgoose Twist interchangeable needles. The color I used, size 3, US size 3, 3.25 millimeters needles. But the pattern calls for US size 2, 2.5, 3mm needles. There's no rhyme or reason as to why I used a different size. I just misread the directions and I thought I needed to use a size 3. I don't think it made that much of a difference. For the rest of it, I am using US size 7. So it's a 4.5mm needles. And I love the Chalgoos, even with the interchangeable needles. I haven't had any problems with them coming loose. These are wonderful needles. My next whip, even though I did not work on my gray dragon scale gloves or my hooded mantle, I ended up casting on a new hat. The reason is because I have been so incensed by the injustice that's been happening with Black and brown people, people of color, and the Asian Americans, and Pacific Islander, all of those hate crimes that have been happening are just ridiculous. I mean, I don't have words. So I had to start a craftivist project. This is my hat. In the very bottom, it's a double, so this is a double brim. I did, black. I started with the black, and I made it a double brim, and it says "stand in the gap" along the brim on both sides, and then on this side, it will say hashtag Stop Asian Hate, and then on this side is Black Lives Matter with the Black Power fist. I was wearing a Black Lives Matter mask, but I found, especially when I was traveling and at the hospital, because it's a neck goiter type mask, I couldn't wear it, even though I was wearing other masks underneath. I decided I need to make something else that I could wear. I don't have the physical energy or ability to go out and volunteer as an activist, so I'm becoming a craftivist instead. Stand in the Gap is from the Goddess of Orange, Gay Gillespie, Gigi from Gigi Made It. This is from her teachings. It's about, as white people, we need to stand in the gap. But we need to stand between the races to protect the people that they're attacking. That's what stand in the gap is. The Black Lives, and I kind of created this chart myself just to have something just the simple letters, to have a guide for writing the knit letters in my work. The Black Lives Matter chart is actually a free chart, and I'll link that below. Borrowed from sort of the font on this one to create my chart for the Stop Asian Hate. So this is a chart that I kind of came up with. And if this is something you'd like to do, just send me an email or something, or make a comment. If you'd like the pattern for this, I'd be happy to share this with you. The numbers for the hat I borrowed from the sock head hat pattern. This yarn is super thin. Even with the extra large size, it was too small. So it did say to increase by multiples of 8 if you needed to. So that's what I did. And I can't remember how many stitches I put on here, but they're in multiples of 8. I also needed to make sure that there was enough stitches in order to get the letters on. This is just a cheap acrylic nylon blend. I don't think it's very good for color work. Either that or I'm just not very good at color work myself. So the next time I make something like this, I'd like to go ahead and get some nice wool. I think wool is better for color work anyway. But at least, it says what I want it to say, and it makes the statement that I want it to make. It needs to be anti-racist. The yarn for this is Loops and Threads. It's the wool-like yarn. And like I said, it's nothing special. It's just the acrylic nylon blend. And this is just white. And the other is just black. So I wanted something really simple because it's the message that's what's supposed to be standing out. And the needle I'm using, of course, doing the magic loop, these are the ChowGoo's size US 2, 2.75 millimeters needles. This is the one, the needles that I was using for the sock head hat and cowl. So same size, which I don't think is what the pattern calls for, but that's what I have. Now on to books. I finished reading The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. This was first published in 2011. This was both such a great read and, for this particular time in the pandemic, a very frustrating read all at the same time. It's easy to understand what Carr means about the internet reducing our ability to think deeply and to process information effectively. Of course, you see that in the recent epidemic of misinformation and conspiracy theories. And the conspiracy theories and all of that that's been going on is obviously way past what this is happening. I mean, we've always had conspiracy theories, but the internet is making it 10 times worse. And reading this book kind of gives a clarification as to why it's happening. So even though this book was published 10 years ago, it's extremely relevant today. So I would definitely highly recommend this one. A great part about this book talks about cognitive load, which is basically the information that goes into our working memory at any given moment. He says that experiments indicate that as we reach the limits of our working memory, it becomes harder to distinguish relevant information from irrelevant information, signal from noise. We become mindless consumers of data. And I think that's why the whole problem with conspiracy theories has happened. People there's so much noise and they're not processing things effectively. They're not using their critical thinking skills in order to say, hey, maybe there's something wrong here. Such a good read. So he actually goes on to say that the environment of the internet is like trying to do a crossword puzzle and read a book at the same time. Your brain just can't handle that. When I was in Denver, I stayed on my sister-in-law's farm. I actually ended up staying in the camper outside the house so that I can continue to self-isolate. I had internet, but it was very spotty. It's always spotty out there. There's just, it's gotten better. They got a booster. But it's very rural, and so the internet is not the greatest. So I spent most of my time knitting and listening to audiobooks, and honestly, it was like going on a retreat. I unplugged for a while. It was very relaxing. I suggest you unplug for a while, which I know is kind of contradictory thinking as you're watching YouTube. But, do unplug for a while. You'll like it. You'll enjoy it. As I said, I listened to a lot of audiobooks. I ended up finishing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series by Douglas Adams. This series was published between 1979 and 1992. For some reason, I had always thought that I had read the whole series, but obviously I did not. I guess I was just sort of living vicariously through others who have read the books. I did know that it was a fun series and I really enjoyed the books. I think I had only read through half of the second book, really. I don't think I even read the whole thing because I don't remember the ending at all of the restaurant at the end of the universe. But I enjoyed it. It was fun. It's one of those books that, it starts one way and it veers off into these, or one of these series rather, it veers off into these different tangents about science and space and exploration, and it absolutely comes full circle. Like, you wonder, okay, where's he going with all of this? And then at the end you're like, okay, it's definitely a circle. It's definitely a series that I will be reading again in the future. And I think I'm going to read the sixth book, which is actually one by Eowyn. I want to say that's how you pronounce her name. It sounds Irish. and Irish names are the worst to try to pronounce from reading them. Eowyn Colfer, and she wrote the 6th book with permission from Douglas Adams' widow. It's called And Another Thing. The title, And Another Thing, is actually taken from the 4th book. The quote for that is, "The storm had now definitely abated, and what thunder there was now grumbled over more distant hills, like a man saying, 'And another thing,' 20 minutes after admitting he's lost the argument." That's very Douglas Adams-esque. Here he is, no longer with us, and he's still saying, "And another thing," through this 6th book of the trilogy. The next audiobook I listened to is the first of a series, and it seemed promising, and I think it was mentioned by Ray from Needles at the Ready, and it's called The Awakening by Nora Roberts. It was actually just published this past November, so brand new, so only one in the series so far. I guess the whole series is about dragons. There were dragons in the first book, but they were very minor. It's a minor thing, so I'm assuming she's going to build on that. I've never read Nora Roberts before. I guess normally she's a romance writer, and I'm not really into romance novels, which is weird because I say that, and my first novel that I wrote is a romance. I'm not a romance writer, probably because I'm not a romance reader. But I actually enjoyed this one. So it's basically the story of a young woman who lives in Pittsburgh. No, she lives in Philadelphia, and she's in this hard space. She's a teacher with too much debt. She's not good at teaching. She's not really happy with her life, and comes through a windfall and decides to go and search for her roots in Ireland, and finds out she is descended from this magical race of people. So that's what drew me to the book, is this Ireland and fairies and magical race of people. That was totally there is a bit of romance in it. There's one bedroom scene that goes on a little too long for my taste, but it wasn't as bad as Outlander as far as that goes. So I was like, okay, let's stop this and get back to the story, please. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good series, so I'm looking forward to the next one. I also decided to reread the first Percy Jackson book by Rick Riordan. Percy Jackson, The Lightning Thief was first published in 2005, and I was inspired to reread this one by watching a new podcast. Her name is Emma, and she has a show called The Novelty Knitting Podcast. Cute, clever. So her show is all about knitting and books. So right up my alley. The last time I read Percy Jackson, I really enjoyed it, but my boys were like really small, maybe 3 and 4 years old, so I got interrupted a lot, and I really had a hard time kind of following along because I kept taking too many long breaks between reading times. It was just really difficult to focus on the story, which is kind of appropriate because this story is about a little boy with ADHD. I'm glad I reread it because there were whole chunks of the story that I didn't remember. And I love how Rick Riordan uses what society would normally consider a weakness and turns it into a heroic strength, like ADHD and dyslexia. It's what helps him become this superhero. And then of course there's the element of learning about Greek mythology. I'm looking forward to reading the next one. It's actually in my I borrowed it from the library, and it's actually in my list now. I had started reading The Hobbit, rereading obviously The Hobbit by Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. It was first published in 1937, and I really don't read it often enough. I started reading it listening to the audiobook. It took forever to get the book. I had to wait for it. It was on hold at the library. it's still wildly popular. I got the book, and it was when I was trying to figure out this diagnosis. I got stressed out about stuff. I couldn't focus on it. I didn't get to listen to it when I had it. And by the time I got going with listening to it, because it was the audiobook, I got to a little about halfway in. So when I left off, Bilbo was escaping from the elves of Mirkwood. He'd put the dwarves in the barrels, and he's trying to figure out a way to escape himself, and that's where I left off. And the book got taken back to the library, and now I have to wait about 16 weeks before I can finish the story. Oh well. But I can read the Percy Jackson books now. But I do love The Hobbit. It's one of my favorite books. My favorite part about the story is how Gandalf just barges into Bilbo's little quiet life and assumes he's going to go on this adventure. And if you read carefully, Bilbo is not really interested in the adventure at all until the harp. And this is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite stories. The song in that first chapter is what stirs Bilbo into considering, yeah, maybe I'm ready for an adventure. I'd like to, go exploring. It's his tookish nature that finally starts speaking to him. But it doesn't really start until the most important dwarf, Thorin, plays the most important instrument, the harp. And there's a reason for that. Tolkien was a scholar of the poem Beowulf. He loved it. He could speak the Old English, which is something I learned. Oh, I didn't learn the whole thing. I just learned the first 11 lines. It's what I sing in the opening song to this show, is the first 11 lines of Beowulf in Old English. The song, the poem, would have originally have been sung to a stringed instrument, like a little harp or a lyre. This was before it was even ever written down. It was always done by memory. The poem itself, the harp is very important to the poem of Beowulf. And if you read Beowulf and The Hobbit, you'll see a lot of parallels and similarities. He incorporated a lot of Beowulf into the writing of The Hobbit. The Hobbit is a rewriting of Beowulf. So I am really ready for my hold to come back at the library so that I can finish reading that one. And then, of course, I'm going to move right into The Lord of the Rings again. The next physical book that I've decided to read is The Catcher in the Rye. This is by J.D. Salinger. And it was first published as a serial form between 1945 and 1946. And then it was published as a novel in 1951. And I'll be honest, as big as this book is, I mean, it's not that big, but, like everybody knows this book, I never read it. It was never assigned to me in any classes. It was never assigned in high school. I have a bachelor's degree in American and British literature, and I was never made to read this book in any of my classes, which is a little weird. So I'm going to rectify that, as I felt that there has been a big hole in my life that I was never made to read this book. Obviously, it is a used copy. So I have one more book that I'm reading, and it is one that has never, ever, ever been on my radar, ever. And it is Microscopic Colitis by Wayne Percy. I normally don't read self-published books, especially that deal with medical and science, but this one came highly recommended from the people on the Lymphocytic Colitis Facebook group that I joined. Even though Mr. Percy is not a doctor, he is no dummy. He has degrees in engineering, and he has a background in agribusiness. So, he knows how to do his research. So that's what he's done in this book. He researches different studies. He talks to different doctors. It's just that there's very little information about microscopic colitis, and this seems to be where to get most of it. Also, through his support forum, there's an online forum for support for microscopic colitis patients. So a lot of my information that I'm getting on how to deal with my new diagnosis is coming through this information, because there just isn't a whole lot out there. One of the reasons is because, and what he talks about in this book, is this disease was first diagnosed in 1989. They did some cherry picking studies, so very poorly conducted studies. It left the medical community with the idea that this disease never afflicted men. It only affected a certain targeted age group of women, mostly older. So unless you fit the right demographic, they never looked for it. People of all ages are being diagnosed with this. It's autoimmune. And one of the biggest problems is they can't fund any more studies because you treat this problem primarily through diet. And there's no money in diet. People are always looking for medications so they can make $1 million on a new prescription. And yeah, I'm not going to go there. This one I'm not going to get into too much on this show because I'll be talking more about that on my other show about my journey with chronic illness. So if you want to know more about this book, it's probably going to be said in that show. Life stuff pretty much revolves around the lymphocytic colitis. But I do have some kind of exciting news because the colitis is post-COVID. COVID caused this issue. I've been talking about it on social media, and I was contacted by a documentary crew. Well, it's a husband and wife, but they are filmmakers. They generally work in South Africa. They've worked on doing documentaries about Ebola. In fact, the husband is from South Africa, and I guess that's where they met. But they usually work with aid groups like UNICEF and that sort of thing. They reached out to me because they are working on a documentary. It's called COVID-19 Survivor Diaries. I think that's what they called it. If not, I'll go ahead and I'll put it up here anyway. But they've been traveling around to the 50 states interviewing COVID-19 survivors and telling their stories. And now they're realizing that there are like certain genres that go into it. So you have the people that, had to go to the hospital and are recovering from that, and people like me where COVID triggered an autoimmune disorder, and different conditions like that. And so it's all on their website, which I'll link below. Very fascinating to be able to have them here. They interviewed me for a few hours. I talked about my experience with COVID and how it's affected me and long-term problems. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. They took photos afterward for the still shots. They're going to do a book and a documentary. And it was nice to be able to tell my story. I get really frustrated when I still go on social media and I see people still saying, it's just the flu. Don't fret about it. It's not the flu. But that's actually why it took me so long to record anything, even though I've been back for a few weeks, because I talked to them for about 4 hours, and my voice was pretty raw after that. That's why, I had a whole script ready to do this podcast in Stephen Hawking style again, and I started, setting it up to record that way. But my voice started getting better. The problem is I can't have any frozen berries with cream this time because it's a trigger for the colitis. It just increases the inflammation. So I'm not allowed dairy. I'm not allowed fiber of any kind because it causes the inflammation. So once I'm done with the elimination diet, which is basically just carnivore, I'm back to carnivore, just meat this time. Absolutely no plant products, and I'll talk about that in my other show. But once I'm done, like after about 3 months of doing that, I'd like to reincorporate some foods. And the first thing I'm going to reincorporate is coconut cream, which I can freeze and make really cold for my throat. And then after that, the strawberries, frozen strawberries, just to see what happens. Some people can tolerate strawberries, some people can't, so we'll see. Yeah, I guess that's it. I hope you're well. I hope you get to make all the yarny things and read all the books. Hopefully it won't be too long before I record again, because I had a lot to show, and I know that I could do these once a week and I'll be okay. That way the show isn't so long. Sorry for it going too long. I hope to see you soon. Be well. Bye. In a pearl row, but you're either